Today's main news stories, as presented by the IBA English News, concern the effect of stress on Israeli society. A recent poll indicates that the Iranian nuclear threat is the most stressful of all to Israelis. Secondly, in the face of Hamas terrorists' repeated attempt to attack and kidnap Israeli soldiers and civilians who deliver much-needed fuel to Gaza residents, what are Israel's options? And finally, how did a penniless Ethiopian man make his way to Israel through 4 Muslim countries without a passport? It took 4 years. It was a miracle and an answer to his prayers. So stay tuned for my suggested prayer points right after the news so you too can make a difference in Israel today.
Good evening and welcome to IBA News, coming to you from Jerusalem. We open with this late development. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert will meet with PA President Mahmoud Abbas at 5:30 this evening. The two leaders will hold private talks ahead of Abbas's upcoming visit to Washington. Announcement of the meeting by the Prime Minister's office came just a short time ago. IBA's diplomatic reporter, Leah Zinder, says that Israel tried to keep news of the talks secret, but the story was leaked by the Palestinians several hours ago. Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni has arrived in the Qatari capital of Doha today. This is the first official visit by an Israeli leader to the Gulf state in 12 years. Livni is expected to ask Qatar to help in the efforts to free captured IDF soldier Gilad Shalit. The foreign minister will also address the Doha Forum on Democracy, Development, and Free Trade as a keynote speaker. Diplomatic sources deny reports that Livni will meet with Syrian officials, but confirm that she will hold talks with other Arab foreign ministers at the Doha Forum, which draws together some 600 government ministers, members of parliament, academics, and journalists. Livni is expected to attempt to strengthen the opposition of moderate Arab states to the Iranian nuclear program. Before leaving for Qatar, Foreign Minister Livni attended the weekly cabinet session. Ahead of the meeting, several cabinet ministers voiced outrage over Palestinian claims that Israel has cut off the fuel supply to Gaza, causing a humanitarian crisis. Israel halted the supplies following last week's murderous attack on the fuel depot at the Gaza-Israel border and says they will resume following a comprehensive investigation of the attack. Housing Minister Zev Boim said, quote, Hamas shamelessly carried out a terrorist attack and murdered 2 civilians operating the fuel terminal, and then they dare to cry out that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. This is a lie, said Boim. This is the assailant posing as a victim.
Just a lie that the Hamas tried to sell all over the world. There is no siege over Gaza. We did not stop the supplies of almost anything. Water, sewage, electricity, gasoline, solar, everything they need. They try to use this opportunity in order to make a bad reputation to the state of Israel. But the facts are that they have all the needs that they have.
Prime Minister Ehud Olmert opened the cabinet meeting with remarks on the environment. Olmert said Israel enjoys some 300 days of sunshine a year. We should be at the forefront of worldwide efforts to exploit solar energy. The Prime Minister promised that the government would step up efforts to develop environmentally friendly sources of power. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter is expected in Israel this evening. Carter is set to meet with President Shimon Peres and with the parents of kidnapped IDF soldier Gilad Shalit before leaving for Syria, where he will hold talks with President Bashar al-Assad and Hamas political chief Khaled Mashal. Carter's scheduled meeting with the terror boss has drawn strong criticism, not only from Israel but also from the U.S. State Department. Sources in the Prime Minister's office said Olmert has no plans to meet the former U.S. president. Opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu is more certain that he will not be meeting with Carter. An aide to Netanyahu said this was because of Carter's anti-Israel views over the past few years. Palestinian terrorists in northern Gaza fired 4 shells at the Kerem Shalom crossing today, while the head of the IDF Southern Command was visiting the site. Brigadier General Yoav Galant was touring the western Negev area and standing about 20 meters from where one of the mortars exploded. The director of the Eshkol Regional Council, Chaim Ylin, also was in the group. No injuries were caused as the tour participants managed to rush into a portable shelter, which was placed at the site by the Army ahead of the visit. Helene said told reporters later that the tour was pre-planned and was aimed at demonstrating what local farmers have to deal with on a daily basis. The alleged fuel crisis in Gaza continues to be more smoke than fire. This according to Israeli officials, who say that while the Nahal Oz depot will remain closed for a few days, there is still a steady supply of fuel and gasoline flowing into the Gaza Strip. IBA's Eli Wogelanter has the story.
The Gaza Strip's main fuel terminal will remain closed for a few days longer, an Israeli official said today, after an attack at Nahal Oz by terrorists last week killed 2 Israeli civilians. Tzachi Hanegbi, head of the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, said the terminal will remain closed for a few days to give us time to check and decide on measures to ensure security. He added that no strategic decision has been taken to close the crossing indefinitely. Palestinian officials have warned that the Gaza Strip's sole power plant could shut down again if it does not receive fresh supplies of fuel. But Israeli officials have challenged the Palestinian statements, saying there is no fuel crisis in Gaza and that the Palestinians are lying to create a fictitious humanitarian disaster in order to pressure the international community. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs quoted Colonel Nir Press, head of the IDF's Coordination and Liaison Administration, saying the State of Israel has permitted the steady and continuous flow of fuel into the Gaza Strip in recent weeks. The statement added that 2.2 million liters of diesel fuel are transferred through the Nahal Oz fuel terminal to the Gaza Strip power plant weekly, as well as unlimited quantities of cooking gas, 800,000 liters of diesel fuel for transportation, and 75,000 liters of gasoline. Eli Wogelanter, IBA News.
At least 3 Hamas terrorists were killed and 4 others wounded today in a so-called work accident or as the result of an internal strife. The terrorist group says it's unclear what caused the blast in a house in the northern Gaza town of Jabalia. An army spokesman denied earlier reports of an Air Force strike and said the IDF was not operating in the area. In local money matters, the Bank of Israel today began distributing new 20-shekel notes made of polymer, a plastic material that is more durable than paper money. 1.8 million polymer notes went into circulation in honor of Israel's 60th birthday. The new 20s are inscribed with the words 60 years to the State of Israel. The main difference between the paper and the polymer notes are the security marks, including a transparent window with the number 20 printed on it. Israel becomes the 27th country to adopt the polymer notes. One young Tel Aviv resident told Israel Television's Moshe Gertel that he drove to Jerusalem to be one of the first to receive what he believes will be a collector's item.
I came here because to get the new banknote of the 20 shekels, and I heard that it's like the Australian bill, that it's from polymer paper, and it hardly rips and it hardly crimples, and that's it.
And what for? Are you a collector?
I'm a collector of all the bills from European countries, Far East countries, American countries, South American countries, African countries, new bills, old bills.
As we reported earlier, Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni today became the first Israeli leader in a dozen years to make an official visit to the Gulf state of Qatar, and former U.S. President Jimmy Carter arrives in Jerusalem ahead of a controversial meeting with the Hamas leader in Damascus. A short time ago, IBA's Leah Zinder spoke about these diplomatic developments with the president of the Israel Council on Foreign Relations, David Hemchi. Hemchi said that he is well acquainted with the country of Qatar.
I think that every visit to an Arab country is important in the sense that we are sending a message that we want to have relations with the Arab countries, and Tzipi Livni knows how to do it very, very well, believe me. So I think it's important, and I think that the message that she has to give is, yes, we do want to go ahead and improve our relations and create normalization with the Arab world.
What I understand is that there are 2 main items on her agenda. The first is trying to get the help of Qatar in gaining the release of Gilad Shalit, and secondly, the Iranian nuclear issue. How important is this visit in terms of both of these items?
I think it's very important because, first of all, Qatar speaks to everyone, including Hamas, and strange as it may seem, because although they have good relations with us, they also have very good relations with Hamas. And they can definitely act as a go-between, another go-between on the Shalit affair, which is of course so important for us for every reason possible. And regarding the Iranian subject, The Gulf countries are in the front line as far as Iran is concerned. They are exactly opposite Iran. They have the most to fear from the Arab world of Iran, and therefore it's important for us to try and reach some form of understanding with the Arab countries, especially of the Gulf. So yes, it is important. But I think she'll also raise a third subject, and that is the peace process.
Okay. Let's go back to Hamas, which you mentioned. We have a guest in Israel this evening, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, who has sparked the anger not only of Israel but also of the State Department in his own country because of his plans to meet with Khalid Mashal in Syria. What do you think about this meeting?
Well, I think that as a former president of the United States, he probably should not meet him, because if the State Department asks him not to, he cannot just poke his, just sort of, ignore what they are saying. So from that point of view, as an American, I think he should not be seeing him. From the point of view of Israel, the Egyptians are seeing him every day. We have unfinished business with Hamas, and that is Shalit. And if he can, in any manner or form, persuade Mashal to come forward and do something on that, then I think we should. I don't see much harm in that from our point of view.
Now, President Peres will be meeting with former President Carter within the hour. What we understand is that Prime Minister Olmert has no plans to meet with the former president, and Netanyahu has said publicly that he will not meet with him. Are they making the right decision?
Well, I know that, for example, Avigdor Lieberman has said that he will be meeting with him, and so have a number of other of our ministers. So I think on the whole, Prime Minister Olmert can and should say what he thinks of him when he meets him, but I think he should meet him. So from that point of view, I think it's a mistake.
And one more question, Mr. Kimchi. Your own organization, the Israel Council on Foreign Relations, will be hosting former President Carter when he returns from his round of talks in Syria and Saudi Arabia next week, I understand. Why are you doing this?
Well, to tell you the truth, we really did a lot of soul searching. Should we, shouldn't we, should we, shouldn't we? It was a very, very tough decision to take. But we are an organization that wants to hear things about what's going on, especially in our region. We don't only invite friends. We had a fantastic lecture once, for example, from Amra Moussa, who is of Egypt, the former foreign minister.
Not a friend of Israel.
Who is not exactly a friend of Israel. If we only invited people who thought exactly as we do, we would be a very boring organization.
Rumors abound about a possible political merger between Labor and Kadima ahead of the next Knesset election. And there's similar speculation about Israel Beitenu tying the knot with Likud. IBA's Leah Zinder discussed this latest political intrigue with Jerusalem Post political reporter Gil Hoffman.
Robert?
Well, the importance of this meeting of the Likud Central Committee, Leah, is the fact that they're meeting at all. They haven't met in more than a year. Netanyahu, who's embarrassed by the Central Committee's colorful antics, has been doing everything possible to avoid them meeting. He had to convene them in order to get the Likud ready for the upcoming municipal elections in November. The meeting is only an hour long and isn't supposed to be sequential at all.
But what is consequential, so it seems, is talk of a joint ticket between the Likud and Avigdor Lieberman's Israel Beitenu party. How realistic is this idea?
It's very realistic, even though it hasn't been discussed in months. The only reason it was brought up today was because it supported the thesis that Ma'ariv had on Friday about Kadima and Labor joining, something that isn't going to happen. It's actually a lot more realistic for Likud and Yisrael Beitenu to run together than it is for Labor and Kadima to run together. It's something that had been discussed in depth by Netanyahu and Lieberman before Lieberman joined the government, and since then there haven't been substantive talks about it, but chances are ahead of the next election there will be again.
And even though this will push Netanyahu more to the right, something that he's been avoiding over the last few months, you think that this is something that he may do? And does this have anything to do with the fact that Netanyahu, while he's still a front runner, has been slipping in the polls?
Well, it doesn't have to do with Netanyahu slipping in the polls, because it's something that really hasn't been discussed in the last few months, even though it was in one of the papers today. But it wouldn't necessarily move Netanyahu more to the right, because Lieberman, even though he talks about destroying things in the Arab world, his diplomatic plans are actually quite centrist. But Netanyahu slipping in the polls has to do with a couple things. It has to do with the reports about him and his travels around the world that make him seem to the poor underclass Likud voters as someone who they can't really relate to. And more importantly, I think the biggest reason for him slipping in the polls is that the further the Second Lebanon War slips away, the further away Olmert's mistakes are, and the less reason people have to try to bring Netanyahu back to save them from imminent doom.
And that indeed brings us to Ehud Olmert, the Prime Minister, and the talk of a joint ticket between Kadima and Labour, something that you say is not going to happen.
I don't think it's going to happen because Olmert believes that he can win the support from the entire centre-left without Labour. He believes that Ehud Barak will self-destruct, and the polls really support that thesis. Since Ehud Barak took over as Minister of Defense, Olmert has been rising in the polls consistently, and Barak has been falling consistently. And so if both leaders, and Barak thinks the same thing, believes the other is going to self-destruct, then there's no reason for either of them to combine, at least until they prove their thesis. After the election, however, they could decide to then cooperate, and especially if Kadima doesn't do well.
And one more quick question, and that is the rumors that Olmert and Mahmoud Abbas are preparing some sort of agreement, vague though it may be, shelf agreement though it may be, perhaps as early as May, and that presumably will help Olmert in the next elections, at least in his view?
Well, I don't know what's going to be released in May. Something will. There's got to be something to make Bush's visit a success in May. They're definitely pushing to try to get an agreement by the November election in the United States. That was the deadline that Olmert and Abu Mazen set. A shelf agreement can be ready by then, and then chances are that Olmert will take that for an election, initiate an election shortly thereafter that would be held sometime in February or May of 2009, and use that to try to win another 4 years in power and defeat Netanyahu.
Gil Hoffman, we'll let you go to the Likud Central Committee. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Italians are voting today in general elections that will likely return conservative Silvio Berlusconi to the Prime Minister's office for the third time. 71-year-old Berlusconi's main challenger is 52-year-old center-left standard-bearer Walter Veltroni, who urged voters to turn the page on the older generation. But billionaire media magnate Berlusconi characterized Veltroni as a communist relic. Polls showed that one-third of Italy's 47 million voters were undecided going into today's election, against a backdrop of faltering economy and political instability. This will be Italy's 62nd government since World War II. In regional news, an explosion in a mosque in Iran that killed 11 people and injured more than 150 others was an accident and not the result of sabotage or terrorism. This according to Iranian police investigators. Authorities believe the blast could have been caused by explosives left behind from a defense exhibit commemorating the 1980-88 Iran-Iraq War. 800 people were packed into the mosque in the southern city of Shiraz listening to a sermon when the blast occurred. Thais and visiting tourists took to the streets of Bangkok today, kicking off celebrations of the Buddhist New Year. As we can see, Beit Chabad is located in the center of activities, and many Israelis are reportedly in attendance. The four-day festival involves the traditional soaking, as Thais across the country drench each other with water. The Songkran, as the festival is known, has become a no-holds-barred party, with drenchings during the day and music and merriment in the evening. Many tourists, including more than a few Israelis, join in the festivities.
Shoot a lot of people and everybody gets wet and it's fun, I don't know, it's sort of fun. All the people smile and it's so, everybody's happy and...
Turning to dance, and 5 days of contemporary French choreography at the Suzanne Dalal Center in Tel Aviv. Beginning Monday, cutting-edge artists from the European country will present their work to local audiences. These pieces have a distinct design visual quality with an emphasis on social awareness. Watch carefully and you'll notice that political messages are also layered into the works, even the performance based on Wagner's classic Tristan and Isolde. There's also a piece stemming from the events of 9/11. The first French connection took place back in 2005, And the French government and embassy have chosen to rejuvenate the cultural exchange. That's the contemporary French dance in Tel Aviv, beginning Monday. Staying with the arts, and an auction will be held this week featuring 150 paintings along with 200 rare antiques, decorative pieces of art, jewelry, and Judaica. The items were created in the 1920s and 30s and are worth an estimated 2.5 million shekels. Artists include Abel Pin, Ludwig Blum, and Zev Raban. Pieces will go under the gavel Wednesday at the Shorashim Gallery in Tel Aviv. And a Jerusalem cultural icon is celebrating 80 years of cinema in the capital. The legendary Smadar Theater in the German colony, which has been showing films since the 1930s, held a very special event with screenings about architecture, love, and cinematic appreciation. The event opened with a lecture on the architecture of the historic theater itself. Poet Chaim Guri also joined in a long list of artists and intellectuals who spoke at the gala event. The theater is housed in a building constructed in 1928 and previously served as a base for the British Army. Strike actions continue today in the public sector. Employment offices are not receiving clients for a third week running. Also on strike are employees of the Health Ministry, the Licensing Bureau, and the Computer Department of the Finance Ministry. Government employees are protesting the Finance Ministry's decision to offer them banking benefits exclusively from Bank Discount. The Histadrut Labor Union is part owner of Bank Yahav, which previously enjoyed exclusive rights to offer such benefits to government employees. Stock Talk now. Share prices on the Tel Aviv Exchange drifted lower on this first day of the trading week. Let's take a look at the late afternoon numbers. IBA weather guy says find a place in the shade tomorrow as the entire country will remain in the grip of a springtime heat wave. Here are the highs and lows in Celsius and Fahrenheit. That's all for today. Make plans to join us tomorrow at this same time on this same channel. Until then, thanks for watching. Have a great evening, and shalom from Jerusalem.